For our final conversation on climate justice and human rights, we are honored to welcome Mary Robinson, who served as the President of Ireland from 1990 to 1997, the first woman to hold that post. She served as United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights from 1997 to 2002, and she is currently chair of the Elders, an independent group founded by Nelson Mandela in 2007 of global leaders working together for peace, justice, and human rights. And it is a good day anytime you can be in the same sentence as Nelson Mandela. So Mary Robinson, thank you for being here with us.
It's a great pleasure. I've been following very closely what Ernie and Hal and my sister Christiana have been saying. It's been a very good panel. I don't know what you're going to ask me.
Well, let me start. Throughout this hour, we've returned to the relationship between climate change and the pandemic. You've talked about the link between human rights and climate change. The people who suffer the most from climate change are those who don't have the means to escape catastrophe or to rebuild afterward. The same really could be said of COVID, I think. Will the pandemic leave us with a world facing greater inequality? And is that what lies ahead as well if we don't deal with climate change?
It's very interesting. Last January, I was almost in despair because we were facing this 2020 year when countries had to increase their ambition. And I didn't see that ambition, least of all from the United States, but actually quite across the board, it wasn't really serious enough. And then we had this immediate crisis. And, let me actually, if I may, just talk about the layers of climate injustice, because we don't think about that enough. I think there are probably about 5 layers of climate injustice. The first layer is that the countries that are least responsible and the communities least responsible are disproportionately affected because of where they live. Small island states, poor countries in Africa, etc. The second layer is the gender dimension. It affects women much more than men. It affects, because they don't have as much power, because they have different roles, because they have limited access to land, to assets, etc. The third dimension, the children reminded us of, the intergenerational injustice. Greta Thunberg and the millions of children, the intergenerational. The fourth is a very important one. It's the injustice of the pathways to development. The rich countries, Europe and the United States and Japan, South Korea, etc., we built our economies on fossil fuel and we're trying to wean them off now. But the poorer countries have to get their people out of poverty. They claimed before Paris in their nationally determined contributions that they would try to do it with clean energy if they got the investment and the skills and the training, etc. And they really didn't. We didn't reach out enough. And so that's a problem. And the fifth layer is the injustice towards nature, that we have undermined the ecosystems that sustain us, the extinction of species, the loss of biodiversity. We are stupid as human beings in how we have lived with nature. So all of that is the injustice that's combined.
When you talk about all those layers of injustice, let me tie it back and ask you, do you think the world that this pandemic leaves us is going to exacerbate or point us in a direction to ameliorate those problems?
I think it will help us.
You do?
For a couple of reasons. First of all, we've learned that people power matters. Our collective staying at home, being locked down, because we care about those more vulnerable, like me, I'm an elder, and the care workers, the health workers, those who have to provide the essential services. So it's our collective behavior is the only thing now. We've no vaccine. So that's the only thing saving us from a worse crisis. Secondly, we're listening to the science. Even in the United States, where people were not listening to climate science enough, if I may say so, they're now listening to the health, I hope, enough. I'm hearing, doubts about that at the highest level, but that's a problem. But actually, states are listening to the science, and that's important. Thirdly, compassion. We're seeing more neighborliness. I'm reading about it all over the United States, what neighbors are doing to help those more affected, a real empathy. We did not have that for the climate victims. Far, far more people have died from climate change than are dying from COVID-19, far more. from the huge impacts globally, and we didn't listen or care, etc. So now we have an empathy. I don't think that will go away. I think, and I hope we'll kind of reflect more on what is essential. Health systems are essential for countries. Education systems are essential for countries. Let's get back to the basics of what we need in this reflective time where we're all locked in our homes, school children are young. I'm deprived of my grandchildren at the moment. I can't hug them. You know, all the strange world we're in. It does affect how we think about the future.
I want to ask you a version of what I asked Christiana. What does this leave you more encouraged or more daunted about the prospect of international cooperation on climate change? What are you learning from this very searing episode about what it will take to sustain a joint global effort?
I have a strange answer to that. As I said, I was almost in despair, trying not to show it in January. I'm less in despair now, but I would never have wished COVID on us, you know, because it's so terrible. But actually, it has disrupted completely our lives, and we couldn't have continued with business as usual. It was going to lead us to disaster. And we had these children, millions of them, coming out all around the world and saying, please, please, listen to the science. And we weren't, frankly. Yes. So now we're in a mess of each country, each community, each town, each city, pretty devastated, but it's not equal. What I'm really aware of is that COVID-19 has exacerbated the inequalities in our world. And if I may use a word as a woman that we use a lot, intersectionality. There is a connection between poverty, gender, race, marginalization, being indigenous, being somebody with disability, being a refugee, an asylum seeker. It's worse and worse and worse. It's worse in the countries for lockdown where you have informal economy, where you work for the food of the day. And if you don't work, you've no food. So you're pretty close to starvation now in a lot of lockdown homes. Think of women locked down in their homes with abusive partners and abusive children, children being abused. We're seeing a lot of that. Think of children being out of school, girls being out of school and being now married off in huge numbers as child brides. This is the world we're living in now. It's not a great leveler. There's a huge inequality in this, but it's also opening up space for empathy about how, as a human race, we can build back better.
You know, we have a question from Lauren, who is a UCD student in Ireland for the president. And it's one that's really relevant in a lot of countries, because she asks, how can we persuade our legislature to approach climate change as urgently as they have approached COVID-19? That goes to something I think a lot of people are wondering. This was something that was here, immediate, undeniable, right in front of you. Climate change unfolds over many months, many years. How do we transfer the sense of urgency that we've seen on this?
Well, I think, in fairness, I think all three panelists before me spoke to this issue in one way or another. It is the looming crisis that we had in January, looming over us, an existential crisis, which the COVID-19 isn't. COVID-19 will be with us. We'll get a vaccine, I hope, and sooner the better, but we'll deal with it like we dealt with, you know, the terrible flu, and we deal with other things. We'll get over it. If we didn't deal with the climate crisis, we would not exist as a human species. And that's what the children understood. That was the intergenerational dialogue. They were saying to us, we're just children. For goodness sake, listen to the scientists. They marched all over the United States, all over the world, in order to tell us. Like, now we have, I think, two crises that are completely interrelated. We have to get out of COVID in a way that helps us to get out of climate, meaning go green, and do it in a way that also links with developing countries. We cannot tackle this on our own. You were asked earlier about the international dimension. As chair of the elders, I care about that a lot. I think about that a lot. We're not in a good time of international cooperation, but surely COVID-19 has taught us, you know, if we don't help the poorest countries with their health systems to cope with this, it will come back to all of us. This is an interconnected world. It's a fragile world. So we have to actually have more solidarity. And we've had frameworks of solidarity. If I may just mention,
Yes.
because I was the special envoy of the Secretary General before the Paris Agreement, and I watched the 193 countries, including the United States, conclude the 2030 agenda with its 17 sustainable development goals, talking about human rights, gender equality, and leave no one behind, solidarity. And then the Paris Agreement, and that too, as Christiana has said, you know, the world came together.
You know, I don't think I'm mischaracterizing your views to say that on climate, you have counseled for more impatience, not more patience. I want to read a quote so everyone can hear it. You've got to get angry with those with more responsibility who are not doing enough, you have said. Governments, business, especially fossil fuel business, agriculture, transportation, communities, everybody that should be doing more. Why do you think we need more impatience?
I have to tell you a funny story, if I may. I was marching at the big global march in 2014 before the first climate summit of the UN with Gru Brundtland of the elders, who's a fellow elder with me. And out of it, we couldn't even move because 400,000 people had marched in New York. We were shuffling along very slowly. And out of a side corridor came women with a banner that said "Angry Grannies." And I thought, I want to join Angry Grannies. And it's that sense at this stage of my life. I want a future for my own grandchildren. They will be in their 30s and 40s in 2050. They will share the world with more than 9 billion, maybe 9.5 billion. You know, that huge, how will that work? This was on my mind before COVID. It's on my mind even more now. I think we can learn the lessons of, you know, of being a human race, of being fragile in our humanity. We've made mistakes because we haven't lived well with nature. We have, you know, sort of used the extraction of coal, oil, gas to fuel our economies. We mustn't do that anymore. We have to get out of that. I'm reading that, you know, there is a proposal for a 750 billion bond for fossil fuel companies. We need fossil fuel in the intermediate for a just transition, but we must be very careful not to give it to fossil fuel companies unless they commit to the transition to clean energy. That to me is vital.
You know, we have a terrific question from Chantal, which might be a good way to kind of sum up the whole day. What is the best way for the average person to make a difference on this issue?
The average person is making a difference on COVID. Let's think about that. So the average person is a consumer. The average person is a voter. The average person actually has a lot of power just going forward in this very uncertain time that we're in, where you know, those who have the responsibility at government level or at business level for policies have to listen to what people are really feeling about our world. The COVID-19 is a huge correction to a business as usual, which was leading us to extinction, I'm afraid. And I really believe that. If you look at the science, if we had continued on that path, we had no recovery possible. So we're learning that we have to, and there's so much good going on in business that is leading this, and including United States business leaders. You know, Salesforce and lots of others. I'm on the B team of business leaders, and they're doing terrific work. I'm full of hope about it. I actually learned from Desmond Tutu, the first chair of the elders that I now chair, that he was accused of being an optimist. He said, no, I'm not an optimist. I'm a prisoner of hope. And I think that's the way forward, to be prisoners of hope, to deal with the issues we deal with and to move forward.
Well, Madam President, I think if there were all 1,000 or so people on the broadcast could speak right now, they would agree that that was just an incisive and even exhilarating presentation. So thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your thoughts with us, as well as your outstanding bookcases. I want to thank all of our
husbands. They're my husband's bookcases.
Yes. Well, thank you, and thank your husband, and thank all of our speakers for joining us again today. Thanks to our underwriter, the Churchill Capital Corp, for supporting this program, and thanks most of all to all of you out there for spending an hour of your day with us. today. I'm Ron Brownstein with The Atlantic, and we'll see you next week for the next installment of The Way Forward. Thanks again to all of our speakers. Bye-bye.